When you hear the words climate change, does it invoke a feeling of anxiety? For many, it does. And it's that sense of dread that may be keeping educators from talking about climate in their classrooms. In this episode, I am joined by author, adjunct faculty, faculty development facilitator, and the creator of Climate Action Pedagogy, Costa, who says that all courses are climate courses. It can help reduce climate anxiety with action.
Welcome to Teach and Learn, a podcast for curious educators brought to you by D2L.
Each week, we'll meet some of the sharpest minds in the K-20 space. Sharpen your pencils, class is about to begin.
You specialize in lots of different things related to teaching and learning, but really part of it is helping educators incorporate climate action into their teaching. And I think that's really interesting, but I have to ask you, you are a faculty developer and you're not a climate scientist from what I know, unless you have a secret background that I'm not aware of. So can you walk me through how you combine those two passions and sort of what inspired you to go down this road?
Sure. So it actually started in therapy, as many great stories do. It was the fall of 2021. And if folks can remember what was going on in the world at that time, it was another COVID surge. It was the Omicron variant. And I knew enough I didn't know a ton about climate science, but I knew enough at that point to know that pandemics and climate change are connected. And I started to feel really, really hopeless. So I went to therapy that day and I said to my therapist, I've decided there's two options here for me in how to live my life. So I need your professional opinion. I said, option one is to feel hopeless and face the reality that things are really awful and just be miserable. Option two is I can pretend like everything's okay. I can delude myself into this sort of fake happiness. So I said, which of those two options in your professional opinion is the healthier choice? So she, of course, said, is it possible there's a third option? Are you willing to accept that there might be a third option? And I was, because option one and option two honestly felt awful. Both of them felt awful. I didn't like option one and two. So I was happy for option three. So she gave me some homework, and the homework was to find one of the millions of people who are working to address the climate emergency and to spend some time listening to them. So later that night, I listened to some podcasts, some climate action podcasts, and I heard this phrase, all jobs are climate jobs, which is a really common phrase in the climate action community. And I was writing in my journal and I wrote down, well, okay, my job, I have a few jobs if folks know me, but my primary job is supporting faculty in their lives and in their teaching. What would it look like if that job was to be a climate job? And I started writing in my journal what that might look like. And I wrote out the entire model for climate action pedagogy. So it was always intended to not only address the climate crisis through the work of faculty development, but it was also intended to address this other crisis of what I consider to be, and many do, a mental illness epidemic that we're seeing and that people are paying a lot more attention to since the start of COVID. And the idea being that action is an antidote to despair. So that taking small actions in loving communities in our classrooms could not only address the climate emergency, but could also address mental health and mental illness. So and the other thing that I knew right from the start was that this was not meant to be about redesigning an entire course. I wrote in my journal about what I called curricular weaving. Don't know where it came from, but it came through. And the idea is that you're taking these threads of small climate actions and weaving them into your existing courses. Because the other thing that I know you and I feel equally passionate about is faculty success. And this, our faculty are overwhelmed, dealing with so many crises in and out of the classroom, taking care of their own lives and well-being and families. And I, couldn't see, putting all of this huge thing onto them that they needed to do one more thing. So this idea of weaving in small threads was always the heart of this as well. And, all jobs are climate jobs is our permission as non-climate scientists to take a look at the work that we're already doing in and outside of our homes, out in our communities, in our spiritual communities for paid work, and say, what would it look like if that was to become a climate job, and to start there.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that notion of empowerment, not only permission, right? That there's this feeling of being empowered to do something, but to your point, it's not just a singular thread around feeling either despair or hopeless. And even as an educator during that time period and beyond, this is not something that has gone away. And I think looking at ways to address it is absolutely critical, especially when we think about all of the various burdens of faculty, but also recognizing a lot of faculty are looking to make impacts. That's part of the reason we got into this work to begin with. So I love that. So tell us a little bit more about it. Can we examine it a bit, the Climate Action Pedagogy Plan, sort of who is it for? What's it about? How you talked about journaling around it, but then it sounds like there's definitely some more structure. So
Sure.
give us the detail.
Sure. So there are 3 core tenets of climate action pedagogy. The first is accessibility. I know many of us are concerned about, creating inclusive classrooms. That has long been part of my work. Accessibility is number one when I teach climate action pedagogy. So we're not going to, what I like to say is we're not leaving anybody behind in this work, first and foremost. We want to make sure that the climate action pedagogy content that we design and the climate action resources we bring into our courses are accessible to all of our learners. The other part of accessibility is that disabled folks and marginalized folks are uniquely positioned as leaders, and they are really, and I'll include myself because I have disabilities and identify as disabled, and neurodivergent, we are really experts at adapting without lots of resources and adapting in challenging circumstances. So accessibility is not only about including everybody because it's the right thing to do, but also about really centering disabled folks and marginalized folks because we are experts in doing a lot with a little, which is a really important part of climate action work. The second component is learning experience design, LXD. Some folks might not be familiar with LXD and might be more familiar with instructional design as a model. But for me, the difference is that, and there's some overlap here, but instructional design focuses on alignment. Learning experience design prioritizes empathy. So this is about designing climate action pedagogy resources in our courses with empathy in mind for our learners and for ourselves. So that really is that intersection between student success and faculty success. So LXD challenges us to ask, who are my learners and what do they want and need? And who am I? I matter in this equation too. What do I want and need? I can think of tons of examples where what might be best for my students is not sustainable or what's best for me. And therefore, it is not what is best for my students, because if I'm going to continue doing this work, I've got to create simple and sustainable systems as an educator. So that's tenet 2 of CAP. And then the third tenet is emergence strategy. And this, I rely very heavily, if anybody who knows me, I've sold lots of her books, and hopefully this will sell some more. Adrienne Marie Brown. I use her model of emergence strategy. And one of the mottos of emergence strategy is small is all. So it really, there is sometimes I use the word obsession, but we might say heavy focus on immediately getting to scale and designing through the vision of scale in higher education. And emergence strategy really comes at it from a different perspective with the idea that small is all. And another important part of emergence strategy is to prioritize critical connections over critical mass. So the example is me showing up to therapy that day and that connection I had with my therapist. I didn't have a plan for how I was going to create some climate action solution and scale it. I just showed up and honored that connection. And then that led to the next connection and the next connection. My connection with my teenager is one of the main motivations for me to really have pushed this work through and gotten it out into the world. It wasn't based on how do I scale this and reach as many people as possible. It was, I want to be able to look my son in the eyes and tell him I did everything that I could possibly do to address this. So that emergent strategy I often will say to faculty, it's about playing the game of small. That also helps to address that faculty overwhelm. So really emphasizing and elevating and celebrating the smallest possible thing that you can do in your class to start talking about climate action. It might be one new discussion board post, or one new, swapping out a video to focus on climate action, or sending an email to one of your colleagues. Those small actions, when done in loving community, and when we're all taking those small actions, do add up, and really can make a difference. So those are the 3 core tenets of CAP.
Super powerful, super powerful. And I love that idea of connecting the emergence strategy piece, because again, with the faculty overwhelm, in any conversation I've been having related to academic innovation, or even how we're addressing faculty and student success, the idea of being able to have programs and approaches that are very consumable and doable. And anytime you're looking at what's happening in the news with faculty, we're hearing about the overwhelm with any new technology, or the latest and greatest approach that we want to take, or there's been a new adoption of a certain curricular program in the P12 system, whatever it happens to be. And the overall often feels like this disempowerment. And so if there's an empowerment, again, going back to being able to take these small actions in your own context, I think that's also what's key, right? Recognizing that we can control at least our context and understand how we might be able to address that with certain student populations or within our own communities. It feels, again, much more accessible. So there's an interesting interconnection among all 3 of these, I think, which makes it even more powerful. So let's go back to this idea of the all courses are climate courses, because I think that's great. And I can see how it comes from that initial piece, the jobs piece, but say more about it. If it's anchored in this belief, you just gave some examples of ways that faculty could potentially make those small moves, but what does that really mean? Because I think of my vantage point as an English faculty member, and also as a person who teaches doctoral students in leadership. I may have a little easier time top of mind, but I could see maybe other folks saying, well, I'm not sure how I would even begin to think about that. So when you say all courses are climate courses, could some people say, well, no, not really. Mine isn't,
Yep. So when I say all courses are climate courses, I'm doing 2 things. The first is I feel like it's a realistic statement, and at the same time, I think it's an affirmational statement. So let me explain what I mean by that. When I say it's a realistic statement, one of the things I'm starting to work with faculty on is to use what are called the Inner Development Goals, IDGs. And somewhat long story short, the Inner Development Goals were born out of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are a UN, United Nations-led initiative from 2015. 17 goals to help us get back into right relationship with our planet. Basically, we're overshooting all of the limitations, and we're doing harm to ourselves and the natural environment. So these Sustainable Development Goals are meant to bring us back into balance with our natural environment. There was an awareness a couple years ago that we weren't making progress on those Sustainable Development Goals. So a group of people, grassroots effort, got together and developed these Inner Development Goals. So there's 5 of them. I'm going to share them with y'all. They are being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. I would like to challenge any higher educator in the world to tell me they aren't doing being, thinking, relating, collaborating, or acting in their courses. However, I believe that. I believe every educator in the world is doing one of those 5 Inner Development Goals, probably multiple ones. However, most of them are not naming that as climate action. So that's what I mean when I say it's realistic. You're already doing climate action pedagogy, but you're probably not capitalizing on it. You're probably not naming it as such. You're probably not claiming that power. So climate action pedagogy, the first thing is, you and I share this background in appreciative inquiry, which is focusing on strengths and finding out what's working and building on that as a strength. I continue to rely on appreciative inquiry, the original AI, right? So I want people, again, to not think about, oh, I've got to be a climate scientist. I've got to learn 900 different things. I have to go read all these books about climate change. Perhaps what you can do is name that your course includes communication skills. And that is a critical climate action skill for us to be able to communicate with one another, especially across differences. You're already doing climate action, but you didn't name it as such. So one of the things I say to faculty is name it and claim it. I want you to name it for yourself, for your students, for your institutions. I want you to name it in your tenure and promotion packets. You are already working on climate action in your courses. The second thing that I'm trying to do with all courses is climate courses is aspirational. So when we're trying to change these huge systems, we are really trying to dig at the root to work on mindsets. And that is what those inner development goals are doing. And that's a large part of what I'm doing in climate action pedagogy. The mindset being that we can destroy our natural environment and be okay. That's the mindset we're trying to get folks out of. Shifting into the mindset of there are limitations that we need to honor on this planet to take care of ourselves, to take care of each other. The mindset is the shift of all courses or climate courses is to acknowledge that if you are taking breath into your body, it didn't come from a library. It didn't come from a peer-reviewed academic journal. It came from plants. It came from our climate. We are here able to have any discussion, able to teach any course because we are breathing and living within this climate on this planet. So the shift I want people to make when they hear all courses or climate courses is to start to recognize that we are our climate and our climate is us, that we are one of the concepts in the inner development goals is interbeing. The idea being that everything we do to our climate, we do to ourselves, and everything we do to each other and to each other's children, we do to ourselves and our children. So that interconnectedness is a mindset shift for many of us who've been taught to extract and destroy and that, rugged individualism. This shift is trying to bring people back into right relationship with nature, with our climate, and with other human beings and other life on this planet. So all courses or climate courses is a very succinct way to do all of those things.
No, I love that. I mean, thinking about that intersection of critical thinking, writing, communication skills, but I can't help but also just hone back in on the community piece because another part of our work, and I know that you're passionate about, as am I, has to do with communities of practice and what that looks like, in all of these different contexts. And as somebody who believes very strongly in that, not only in educational settings, but I truly believe progress doesn't happen in any industry or organization without communities of practice working in healthy ways. I'm also seeing some synergy with that as well. This idea of, again, if you are making these small steps or you're taking these small actions or small moves, and you're able to then spread that through a gathering within a community of practice, that exponentially then improves or increases the impact of whatever the approach happens to be in this case, climate action pedagogy, but it's something that's all then one and the same. And so for the educators listening, what would you like for them to sort of take away when they're hearing climate change in that same breath as education, and that piece around you're breathing the air, you're on this planet? Is there anything else though, that you either hear from them that makes you think, I want to at least give them a little more information so there's not pushback? Anything that's come out of feedback you've gotten as you've been presenting this work? Curious on what the reception has been.
So I've now worked with hundreds of faculty on these different strategies, and I can tell you that I have not heard anyone say, I don't think my course is a climate course. I have heard a lot of people say, I'm terrified. I've heard a lot of people say, I feel like an imposter. I really want to do this. I want to contribute. I want to try, but I'm not a climate scientist and I don't even recycle well. So I feel like I can't participate. These are often people with high-level degrees, incredibly accomplished in their careers, and they are saying, I'm scared, I'm embarrassed, I'm confused, I'm overwhelmed. Those are all the things that that I'm hearing. I haven't heard. Granted, I probably don't travel in circles with or attract lots of climate deniers. They're welcome to come to my workshop, and as long as they're willing to listen and learn. But the majority of faculty that I'm hearing from desperately want to start doing this work, not only for themselves, for their families, for their communities, uh, but for their students. We are getting a lot of data that particularly traditional age students are incredibly hungry for this and angry when they don't see it. And I share those feelings with them. I think a lot of us do, regardless of age. So my answer to those folks is I'm terrified too. Action is an antidote to despair. Action is an antidote to despair. So come to a workshop, find a community, find any community. It doesn't have to be mine. It can be yours or other online communities. Do small things in loving community. So the points you made about community are really important about impact, but they're also important about the sustainability of this work. We cannot do this alone. It's too big and it's too scary. So we've got to find our people. So whatever order you want to do it in, do small things. So find one small thing you can do. I've got free resources on my website. Lots of the webinars that I've done are recorded and free and accessible. Listening to this podcast is an example of a small thing. So do small things and do it in loving community. So find a group of educators that you can work with, that can support you, that can cheer you on as a person and as an educator. And because we need that connection and we need that support. And try. You don't, I started scared. I started pretty clueless, and there's lots of resources, and we really can make a difference right in where we already are. I would add to that. I know that talking about climate change and climate action can feel scary if we aren't experts in that field. We're really comfortable in our expertise. The good news is that you can stay within that wheelhouse of your expertise and we start weaving climate in slowly. That you're not becoming me. You're not becoming somebody else. You're not becoming a climate scientist. You are teaching, Renaissance literature or human services or nursing, and you're slowly starting to weave in those climate pieces.
So true. And I think that goes back also, as I'm hearing you talk about things like being fearful, or if this is anxiety invoking in some way, it's that comment around the difference between strengths-based approaches versus deficits-based. It's okay to acknowledge those quote unquote deficits if you're feeling unsure. We don't want to just pretend like that doesn't exist. But where is the power? The power is really within those categories you share, those IDGs, right? Where it's sort of, these are things like I can latch onto those 5 because I know how to do that. So that to me is a really important piece around the strengths part, especially if you're feeling anxious and or unsure of where to begin. Do what you know. I mean, we talk a lot, and I say this all the time, figure out what you're good at and do more of that. And then you can determine thematically how to continue to infuse this lens of work into it. And then it just becomes much more natural. So I love that, right? So it's okay to have that fear. There's that permission piece, but we can get past the fear by really leaning into our strengths and then still being able to embrace this work bit by bit. So it does feel a little bit more accessible to us. We're talking a lot about higher education. Our audience is really all different folks from the P220 space and beyond. So let's talk about, this might be a basic question, but at what age do you really think students can start to dive into this, and should teachers and educators be thinking about framing it? I think I know what the answer is going to be, but I'll let you talk a little bit about sort of the age appropriateness around some of this work.
Sure. As a non-expert in early childhood education, I stand firmly in my higher education expertise. I will certainly empower all of the early childhood and primary educators to trust their knowledge on this. But I'll coin another phrase here, and I'll say all ages are climate ages. That one just came to me. If you're taking breath on this planet, you are living within a climate, and it's time to learn how to coexist with that with that climate, for the good of us as individuals and for all life on this planet. So that's where I would start. So the second thing I would say is, obviously there are very different approaches depending on the ages that we're working with. But one of the things, we're getting a lot of data from the climate communications field, and in particular, I follow the Yale program for climate communications. They had a great report that came out last year. And one of their key findings was that it's really important that we practice what they call generative framing. In other words, solutions focused. Rather than telling people what climate action is going to take from them, right? So you can't you have to get rid of your car. You have to get a new roof. You have to do X, Y, and Z. You can't turn on here's all the things you can't do if we want to fix this. Generative framing instead is going to show people what they're going to get. So examples, a great example of this is COVID, actually. Obviously, we're still dealing with COVID, and COVID has had countless horrible impacts. And many people recognize that COVID was a really fabric-shattering, meaning-making event in their lives. And particularly in early COVID lockdowns, people were talking a lot about spending more time with their families, more time on hobbies. I go to a pottery studio, and apparently the number of people going to pottery has just gone through the roof. And I'm hearing that about other hands-on activities. That's what I mean by generative framing. So even really terrifying, terrible events there's another side to the coin. So taking climate action can bring us into right relationship with our communities. It can help us get to know our neighbors. It can help our kids play outside without worrying about air pollution and, air hazards. It can help us live longer and healthier and happier lives. It can help us be in community with all life on this planet, not just other human beings. I could go on and on here. So whatever age that we're teaching, and to be honest, this is not like everyone in the climate action space agrees on this kind of thing. There's a lot of people that say, no, we motivate people by terrifying them and telling them the worst impacts. I am not of that mindset. I actually am pretty strongly against that. And we've got some good data that generative solutions-based strategies and communications are what works, and that the terror as a pedagogy and as a motivational strategy actually shuts people down and turns them away. So whatever age group we're working with, again, there's going to be some adaptability here, and I trust teachers, period, and I trust teachers to adapt this to their classes and their age groups. Generative framing is about teaching kids and adults, what will we gain from this if we start making better decisions and if we start getting into the sustainability mindset? What will we learn? What will we get more time to do? How will we be more free as human beings if we do those things? That generative solutions-based framing cuts across all age groups.
Absolutely. I'm also seeing just some parallels with conversations we're having in the technology space around digital tool innovation and AI, and all the hot topics related to academic innovation, educational technology, and this similar idea of what happens when you try to approach it from a fear-mongering perspective versus that solutions-oriented benefits kind of perspective instead. Because ultimately, people do want to understand not only the impact on themselves, the students they're teaching, their community around them. I think as human beings, that's a natural desire that we have, right? I don't think if something's motivated by fear, I'm not sure that there is going to be a lot of sustainability. And if it is, it'll be a sustainability that ultimately doesn't end in an outcome that's also favorable. So I think that's such a good point. So you heard it, whatever grade or level you're teaching. And I think there are ways that educators too can come together across the board to start to understand, what does this look like sort of articulated across the student experience and the faculty and teacher experience as well, because that I think is an interesting next step.
And
I want
to just add one more thing to that.
Sure.
I actually think, I want to also offer, particularly to the educators working with very young kids, in some ways, we're the ones that need to be learning from those young kids, right? It's almost like they almost are the experts, right? Put a young kid outside and they're jumping in leaf piles and they're playing with ants and rolling around in the dirt, and they sort of have this very natural, intuitive connection to the natural world, to the environment, to the climate. The excitement that my son in preschool, his teacher taught him this song called Mr. Sun. And every time the sun would come out, they would sing Mr. Sun, really, this sort of homage and celebration of the sun coming out. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I need to teach those little kids anything. Maybe I need to get out of their way. And maybe what I need to do as an adult is to, look for opportunities to center the wisdom of kids and to get out of the way and to learn from them.
Absolutely. Very true. Yeah. As someone who has 3 kids, totally agree with that as well. I know we're closing in on time, but I want to talk about the work that you've done, some of the books you've written, because I think there's connection here as well. And I want people to get to know you. So let's talk about your books for just a moment. You've written 2, 99 tips for creating simple and sustainable educational videos, a guide for online teachers and flip classes, which is available on Amazon. And the manuscript for your second book, Open Minds, is currently with Johns Hopkins University Press. So are you seeing connection between these works that you've done and climate action pedagogy?
Absolutely. So yes, I like that you said, first of all, that I wrote 2 books, because that makes me feel like the second one is done, even though yes, I'm in the revision process. So, but again, we want to be aspirational and generative. So I appreciate.
Yes.
Yeah. So the first book, it's a book about videos, but it's really a book about faculty and student success, and it's a book about humanizing online learning. Again, I know that's something we both feel very strongly about. I continue to make videos. I'm actually teaching a new course this fall on climate action, and every week has a video. It's how I connect with my online learners. It's how I get into conversation with them. It's a chance to be creative and to connect them to each other, to me, and to the course. So whether you're teaching a fully climate action focused course, or a course that's just weaving in pieces of climate action, I think videos are one of the most powerful and sustainable ways that we have to get into relationship and engagement with students, particularly in our online courses. The second book is focused on designing and teaching for ADHD students. And one of the main threads in that book that people, hopefully when it's in their hands very soon, will get to read about, is this idea that one of my theories is that we, again, really need to center disabled folks, marginalized communities, and neurodivergent folks in this work. One of the really cool concepts I came across in the research was a concept called RICH, and it stands for Resource-Induced Coping Heuristic, which is a mouthful. Basically, it says when you are, marginalized in society, when you don't have a lot of resources, when you're dealing with bias, you get really savvy and you get really smart and you get really creative about getting through the day and surviving. And those sort of survival skills that neurodivergent people have developed are incredibly necessary and important, and I think should be at the center of climate action work. There's also tons of data about ADHD folks outperforming neurotypical folks on tests of creativity, both in lab settings and the real world. ADHDers are truly the world's leading creativity experts. And I would say that creativity is something we need right now. We need to imagine and design and create new and better worlds where everybody's needs get met and where we live within our planet's limitations. So the folks who can do that are the folks who have often faced the most challenges. And that's a big part of the ADHD book. So I'm excited to finish that. Hopefully by the time that comes out, we're going to manifest that and get that out into the world.
That's great. Right. And going back to the video piece too, I think one thing that I always have appreciated about your work, and yes, we're both on the humanizing train for sure, though, is how it should be this casual interaction that people build up these, I think, grandiose visions of, I need to do a video, I have to have a whole studio. And what I appreciate about what your message is and what we've really talked to a lot of faculty about in my own teaching and even at D2L with some of our tools is it's easy to just pop in and say a few things. It doesn't have to be this big, long script. And it's so funny, right? Because I'm sure just like you, for me, at least in my teaching, that is what always comes back across in my student comments and evaluations, whether it's something quick I said in a piece of feedback or in an announcement to try to clarify something, or even just to greet them, not at all related to course content. It's such a powerful tool. And I think it's even more powerful when it isn't super formal. And so what I love about your work is that it's giving ways to integrate these approaches that also feels like those small steps. Because as a faculty, you don't necessarily have the time to be able to create this grandiose, again, studio setting, nor should you. It actually would defeat the purpose and make you feel probably even more distant to your students. So check out that work. I know that it's amazing. So before we say goodbye, if there's one takeaway that you want curious educators who are listening to this podcast to leave with, what would it be?
It's do small things in loving community. That's an easy question.
That's a good one. I love that. Well, I appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for coming on, visiting with me. It's so good to see you. Thank you to our dedicated listeners and curious educators everywhere. Remember to follow us on social media. You can find us on X, Instagram, LinkedIn, or Facebook at D2L, and subscribe to the D2L YouTube channel. You can also sign up for the Teaching and Learning Studio email list for the latest updates on new episodes, articles, and masterclasses. And if you like what you heard, please remember to rate, review, and share this episode. And remember to subscribe so you never miss what we've got in store.
You've been listening to Teach and Learn, a podcast for curious educators brought to you by D2L.
To learn more about our K-12 and corporate solutions, visit D2L.com. Visit the Teaching and Learning Studio for more material for educators by educators, including masterclasses, articles, and interviews.
And remember to hit that subscribe button. And please take a moment to rate, review, and share the podcast. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, school's out.